You kidnapped my 3 children for 12 years. That sentence rang through the courtroom like a thunderclap. I stood frozen, my hands in cuffs, and the woman who had just said it was my own daughter. 12 years ago, she left her 3 children on my doorstep on a rainy night and disappeared. 12 years later, she came back with lawyers, police officers, and television cameras. I didn't protest or argue. I only silently thought about the brown envelope lying beneath the bedroom floor. And I knew. Today, a very old trap was about to be sprung. If you're listening to this story, please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, tap like, and subscribe to the channel to help this story reach more people. My name is Warren. I'm 72 years old, my hair so gray that every time I look in the kitchen mirror under the overhead light, I feel like an old man in the black and white photos from when my father was still alive. I live in a small suburban town in northern Georgia, the kind of place where people greet each other at the gas station, where everyone knows whose dog barks at midnight, and where rumors spread faster than a summer storm. I never thought the last chapter of my life would end with the sound of a wooden gavel in a courtroom, camera shutters flashing non-stop, and cold metal cuffs wrapped around my wrists. It didn't hurt like a knife. It felt more like ice being poured into my blood, freezing everything inside. I could still hear my breathing, still smell the old wood of the courtroom benches, but my mind drifted like a boat that had been tied to a dock too long and was suddenly dragged out to sea in a storm. Melissa stood there, eyes red, hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. She wore a beige office-style coat, her hair neatly pinned up, looking like any mother in commercials about happy families. If you only looked at her, you'd see a grieving woman who had finally found her children and was facing the man who stole their childhood. If you only listened to her voice, you'd think she was speaking from the heart. But I'm her father. I've seen enough versions of Melissa to know she can cry, like turning on a faucet and be as cold as stone once the door closes. What froze me wasn't the accusation. It was the way Melissa looked at me. In that brief moment, behind the tears and the performance, something flashed. Not pain, not regret, the certainty of someone who believes they set the trap perfectly and the prey walked right into it. I raised 3 children for 12 years, from when they were newborns to when the oldest stood nearly shoulder to shoulder with me. I changed diapers with hands stiff from arthritis, mixed formula in the middle of the night, learned how to braid my youngest granddaughter's hair from online videos, even though my eyes struggle with small print. I sat in pediatric waiting rooms, attended elementary school parent meetings, listened as teachers talked about each child's strengths and what they needed help with. I did everything their mother should have done. And then, one morning, everything was torn apart like thin paper. It was a Tuesday. I remember because my routine never changes. I take the kids to school, stop by the grocery store for a few things, come home, drink black coffee, read the local paper, and see whether my left knee feels cooperative that day. I was standing in the kitchen, a small radio on the counter playing an old country song, eggs sizzling in the pan. They were running around the breakfast table. The oldest, Noah, backpack on, chewing toast while asking if he could practice basketball that night. Grace, the middle one, kept looking for her jacket because the morning was chilly. Lily, the youngest, sat on her chair, legs swinging, hair a tangled mess like a bird's nest, softly reciting a poem her teacher had assigned. Then there was a knock at the door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor. It was loud, urgent, like whoever stood outside couldn't wait another second. I thought something was wrong. Maybe an accident. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the door. The moment I cracked it open, it was pushed wide. 3 uniformed police officers stood there. Behind them was a woman in a dark blazer holding a file. Farther down the sidewalk were 2 vehicles with television antennas, cameras on shoulders, lights pointed straight at my house. I heard an officer say my name, ask if I was Warren. I nodded. He read quickly from an arrest warrant and a search order. My ears rang through the middle of it, catching only words like kidnapping, unlawful detention, minors. The woman in the blazer stepped forward and spoke calmly, like reading a restaurant menu. She told me to leave the house immediately. I turned and looked at the kids, 3 faces framed by the kitchen doorway. Noah's eyes were wide, his hands gripping his backpack straps. Grace clutched her old teddy bear like an anchor. Lily started crying, silently at first, like her throat had seized up. I said very slowly, like speaking to someone sleepwalking, that this was a mistake. I was their grandfather. I had paperwork, school records, doctors, neighbors, the church. I said I had never hidden them from anyone. And that was when Melissa stepped out from behind one of the cars. She appeared like she fell from the sky, like a ghost who hadn't existed for 12 years. She ran forward, covering her mouth, sobbing. The cameras swung toward her instantly, drawn like magnets. She called out the children's names in a shaking voice, then turned to me. She pointed straight at my chest, just like she would later in the courtroom. But this was happening right on my front steps, in front of neighbors who were beginning to gather, in front of microphones with local station logos. "He took my children," Melissa cried. "He wouldn't let me see them. He locked them away. He told me I wasn't worthy." One officer looked at me with eyes already made up. The woman in the blazer kept writing. A reporter stepped closer and asked if I had a response to my daughter's accusation. I wanted to say too much. I wanted to tell them about the rainy night, the thunder splitting the sky, the cardboard box on my doorstep. I wanted to tell them about 3 children wrapped in thin blankets, skin cold, and a note with just a few messy words. I wanted to say how Melissa left, how I searched. I wanted to say I called the police, child services, filed for guardianship because no one else stepped up. But before I could open my mouth, my arms were twisted behind my back. The cuffs snapped shut, dry and cold. Noah screamed. Grace ran toward me but was blocked. Lily wailed, "Grandpa!" her voice ripping my insides out. They led me out of my own house, right off the steps where I'd once fixed Noah's shoes, where I'd put bandages on Grace's scraped knee, where I placed a small Christmas tree every year. Neighbors lined the street. Some covered their mouths, some shook their heads, some held up phones. I saw Martha from across the street, who used to bring me apple pie every Thanksgiving, looking at me like I was a stranger. In that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a performance. And I, an old man who only wanted to raise his grandchildren right, was being cast as the villain. From the back seat of the police car, through the metal divider, I saw Melissa holding the children. She pressed her face into Lily's hair like a loving mother, then glanced toward me. Just a glance, quick as lightning, but enough for me to read it. She wanted me silent. She wanted me terrified. She wanted me to believe it was over. But I had more than fear. I had 12 years of evidence, 12 years of memories, and something Melissa didn't know I still kept. The brown envelope. I hid it under the floorboard in my bedroom, right next to the bed I slept in. I'd thought about throwing it away many times. Each time I was afraid, not for myself, but for the children. I told myself as long as they were safe, I could endure anything. I could endure being talked about, being alone, growing old with aching bones. But sitting in the holding room, staring at my wrists reddened by cuffs, hearing the steel door slam shut down the hall, I understood something else. My endurance had become the thing Melissa used to crush me. I leaned my head against the cold wall and closed my eyes. I saw Noah holding his basketball, Grace gripping a short pencil to save money, Lily asleep in the back seat when I picked her up from preschool. I couldn't let them grow up believing their grandfather was a monster. I breathed slowly, the way my cardiologist taught me when my chest tightened. I told myself that if Melissa wanted to turn me into a beast, I would let her perform until she thought she'd won. And then, at the right moment, I would pull the curtain down. I opened my eyes and looked through the small glass window of the holding room, white light pouring in like a hospital hallway. I heard someone say my name outside, papers flipping fast. I knew my life had just turned onto a road with no peace left on it. And in that cold silence, I said to myself, where no one else could hear, if they want a war today, they're going to get one. The holding room door opened again, the hinge squealing softly before going quiet. A man in a light blue shirt stood in the doorway, wearing an ID badge, his face tired like someone used to seeing despair every day. He called my name and told me to stand for processing. I followed him, my left knee flaring with pain, but I kept my back straight. If anyone was waiting for me to collapse, I wasn't giving them that. Walking down the hallway, I caught the sound of a TV from a staff room. The anchor's voice was even, like reading the weather, but my name was pronounced clearly. They talked about an elderly man arrested for kidnapping 3 children, and a mother reunited after years of desperate searching. I didn't need to see the screen to know which image they used. Not me standing with the kids at school events, not Noah receiving a math award. They chose the moment I was cuffed, my face pale under flashing lights, enough for anyone scrolling past to decide my guilt. In the interrogation room, an officer placed a paper in front of me. He asked if I understood what I was accused of. I said I did. He asked how I had kept the children, whether I had blocked Melissa from contacting them. I looked him in the eye and told the truth, but I spoke little. Not because I lacked a story, but because I knew the truth doesn't automatically win in a room like this. Then he repeated what Melissa had said at my door, almost word for word. She says you kept them locked inside the house. That sentence landed like a slap. Not on the skin, but on my dignity. I raised those children by taking them to school every day, signing them up for clubs, teaching them to greet adults, bringing them to church on Sundays, letting them run in the park, practice basketball at the town gym. And with one sentence, it all became locked up. I forced myself to breathe. I reminded myself that anger would only make me look like exactly what they wanted to paint. I asked the officer whether Melissa had provided any evidence. He didn't answer directly, only said the court would decide. I nodded and stayed silent. That night, when they took me to the temporary holding area, the steel door slammed shut with the weight of a final period. In the small room with only a metal bed and a thin blanket, I lay on my side, staring at the stained ceiling. I thought back 12 years, to the night everything began. It was raining then, too, that warm, persistent southern spring rain. I had just turned off the living room light when I heard a soft knock, then something being set down on the porch. I opened the door and saw an old car seat. Inside it, a newborn sleeping, cheeks puffed up from the cold. Beside it were 2 smaller children wrapped in the same thin blanket, eyes wide, lips blue. The porch light made the rain look like silver threads. Melissa wasn't there. Only a hurriedly folded note, the writing shaky like it had been written in a moving car. I remember my hands trembling as I opened it, the smell of damp paper mixed with rain. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Don't look for me. That was all. No address, no explanation, not a single question about how her children would live. I called her phone. No answer. Again and again, until only voicemail remained. Oh, I carried the baby inside, whispering like a prayer, and called the police. I called a friend who used to work in social services. I did everything by the book. But small towns have gaps the law can't fill. When a mother disappears and 3 children are on their grandfather's porch, the only question left is who will take care of them now. I said I would. I thought it would be weeks, months, until Melissa came to her senses and returned, apologizing, becoming a mother again. But weeks turned into months, months into years. I sent letters to the last address I knew. They came back. I asked old acquaintances. They shook their heads. Eventually, I stopped asking. Not because I forgave her, but because every no sign took another piece of trust out of me. In the early years, I lived on my pension and a little savings. I had planned a quiet retirement, fishing, fixing the porch, driving to see old friends now and then. But 3 children don't live by plans. I went back to part-time work at a hardware store, took delivery jobs. Mornings I drove them to school, afternoons I picked them up, evenings I did bookkeeping for someone I knew. Some months, money for my knee medication competed directly with money for Noah's new shoes. I always chose the shoes. I sold my father's watch, the one I'd promised to pass down to my daughter. I sold my record collection, even the leather armchair where I used to read. The house grew emptier, but the kitchen stayed full, always with milk, bread, fruit. I learned to live frugally without complaint. When Noah asked why I didn't buy certain things, I just smiled and said I liked saving money for what mattered more. What mattered more was their faces when they slept peacefully. What mattered more was Grace's laugh when she solved a hard math problem. What mattered more was Lily wrapping her arms around my neck and saying she liked the smell of my jacket because it smelled like home. And then Melissa returned, not like a mother asking forgiveness, but like an actress stepping onto a stage right as the lights came on. The next morning, a young woman assigned as my public defender came to see me. She introduced herself quickly, set a folder on the table. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe like she was weighing merchandise. She said bluntly that the case was bad because of the media, because it involved children, and because the accuser was my biological daughter. "I need you to tell it clean and clear," she said. "Do you have guardianship papers, proof she left, police reports from that time?" I nodded and said yes. I told her I kept records, had copies, had everything at home. But when I mentioned the brown envelope, I stopped. I looked down at my hands, the veins thick and raised, then back up at the lawyer. She didn't seem convinced or unconvinced. She just seemed busy. And that was frightening in a different way. Because I understood that in this system, if my story wasn't sharp enough, fast enough, or appealing enough to the listener, it would be discarded like an unimportant sheet of paper. When she stood up to leave, she said she would request a delay to gather records, but she also mentioned that the court might keep me detained due to risk of flight and risk of harm. I almost laughed when I heard the word flight. I was 72 years old, my knee hurt, my home was right here, my entire life was right here. Where exactly was I supposed to run? But I didn't laugh. I just nodded, because I was starting to see the bigger picture. Justice doesn't stand with the silent. Justice stands with the story that's told better, broadcast louder, and lit more brightly. That night I heard the television again out in the hallway. They were interviewing Melissa. She cried just enough, paused just enough, talking about 12 years of hell and children who were locked away. She looked straight into the camera and said a sentence that made me clench my fists until my nails pressed into my skin. "I will bring my children home. I will not let that man destroy their lives any longer." That man, not father, not grandfather, that man. I sat for a long time with my back against the wall, listening to my heartbeat slow. In my mind, the brown envelope appeared as clearly as if it were lying in front of me. I understood that the right moment to strike back was not when I screamed in despair. The right moment was when they believed I had no way out, when they grew careless, when the stage they built revealed the strings behind it. I looked through the small window where the hallway lights stayed on all night, never letting you forget you were being watched. I closed my eyes and told myself something simple. I had stayed silent for 12 years to protect 3 children. But from today on, I would choose silence in my own way and use it like a knife hidden inside my coat. The next morning, they escorted me out of the holding area for my first hearing. I walked down a long corridor, the pale fluorescent lights making everyone's skin look washed out. The smell of bleach, damp paper, and cold coffee blended together, the scent of places where time belongs to no one. When I entered the courtroom, I heard camera shutters clicking like rain on a windshield. Melissa sat in the front row, hair neatly styled, wearing a cream-colored outfit chosen to look trustworthy on camera. Beside her was a man in a black suit, a leather briefcase resting neatly on his knee, his face calm and confident, like someone used to winning. I glanced at his polished shoes and asked myself one very specific question. Where did the money come from? I was no longer naive enough to think things ran on fairness alone. But I wasn't used to seeing my daughter return with a lineup like that, complete with a private lawyer, media, and a story packaged and ready to sell to the whole town. The judge asked the prosecutor to present. They spoke about danger, about controlling behavior, about a prolonged period of confinement. They used long, cold, clean words, like rubber gloves. Melissa was invited to speak. She stood, her voice trembling just enough, her tears measured, and looked straight at me as if I were a stranger. "I searched for 12 years, she said. "I was deceived, threatened, cut off. I only want to bring my children home." Someone at the back of the room sobbed. I didn't turn around. I looked at my hands resting on the table, feeling the cold wood seep into my skin. I thought of the nights I sat by the children's beds when they had fevers, of parent-teacher meetings, of the Christmas cards they made by hand. I didn't argue in that moment because I saw one thing clearly. They didn't need the truth. They needed an image, and they already had it. My lawyer stood to respond, saying I had records, reports from the time Melissa disappeared, school and medical documents, everything showing I raised the children openly, without hiding them. But when she mentioned bail, the prosecutor proposed an amount so high I almost thought I misheard. That number wasn't meant for an old man living on a pension. It was a lock on the door, telling me not to dream of stepping outside to gather evidence. The judge reviewed the file, glanced toward the media, and upheld it. I heard the gavel strike, and in that moment I understood what an invisible sentence was. No one had declared me guilty, but the way they looked at me was already a sentence. The way the story spread outside was already a sentence. I was being punished before I ever had the chance to speak fully. As they led me back to the car, I caught a glimpse of a court employee's phone screen. A large headline jumped out, a few clipped lines paired with a photo of me in handcuffs. I didn't read it all, and I didn't need to. I looked at the eyes of people standing on the courthouse steps, some who had greeted me at the grocery store, sat beside me in church. They didn't step closer. They stepped back. That night in the detention area, I felt the change clearly. The air felt thicker. I was no longer an old man in a lawsuit. I was an old man carrying a rumor that people didn't bother to understand. In places like this, a label can make you unsafe without anyone saying it out loud. I kept myself quiet, sat close to the wall, eyes forward, not challenging anyone. I'd lived long enough to know that sometimes survival isn't about strength, but about knowing when to keep your head down and your mind sharp. Even so, I could feel tension following me. During a transfer, I heard words meant to provoke me. I didn't answer. A moment later, I was jostled hard enough to stumble, and the message was clear. They wanted me shaken, distracted, easier to break. There were whistles, shouting. They pulled me away, dragged me to safety. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, cold sweat running down my spine. A medical staffer looked at me, asked if I was conscious, if I knew my name. I nodded, my mouth so dry that even a single word hurt. When they took me back to my cell, I lay staring at the ceiling, and this time I wasn't just afraid. I was angry. Not the kind that wants to smash things, but a cold anger that sharpens the mind until you can almost hear an imaginary clock ticking. Someone wanted me silent. Someone wanted me gone before the real trial began. I turned the pieces over in my head. Melissa appeared at exactly the right moment, with cameras. Her lawyer was far too expensive for someone who had vanished without a trace. Bail was set absurdly high to keep me in here, where a label could kill me without knives or guns, just a few looks and a whispered word. I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember the small details from years ago that I'd buried so I could keep living. I saw again a car parked at the corner on that rainy night, lights off as if waiting. I saw a figure standing under the awning of the house across the street, turning away when I opened my door. At the time, I thought it was imagination brought on by rain and panic. Now, the memory returned sharp and clear, as if someone wanted me to recall it at exactly this moment. Then a name struck my mind, like metal hitting metal. Caleb Hargrove, an old friend. Not as close as before, but close enough for me to remember his gravelly laugh, and close enough for me to trust that he could see what others missed. Caleb had worked in insurance, handled tangled cases, and once told me that money always leaves tracks, no matter how carefully it's hidden. I sat up, staring into the dark space of the cell. I knew I couldn't just call anyone freely. I needed my lawyer. I needed a message that was short, clear, and impossible to twist. The next day, when my public defender returned, I didn't talk about fear or humiliation. I said one sentence, low and steady. Help me contact Caleb Hargrove. Tell him to find out where Melissa got the money to stage all of this. She looked at me, and this time her eyes weren't distant. She asked why I was so sure. I didn't explain at length. I told her that if the money had a source, it would lead to the person behind it. And if that person was exposed, the performance would crack. She nodded slowly, weighing it. Then she closed the folder. I watched her leave the cell, and when the door locked behind her, I told myself something that finally steadied my heart. If Caleb listens, everything will start to shift from the one place they think I can't reach. I was called out of my cell on a gray afternoon, rain tapping steadily on the metal roof like someone keeping time for a sad song. My public defender waited in the hallway, her eyes red from lack of sleep, but her voice steadier than the day before. "Someone has posted bail for you," she said quietly, as if the walls might listen. "But the conditions are strict." I didn't ask right away who. I looked at the papers in her hand, the dense lines of text, the conditions like iron mesh. Release wasn't freedom. It was just a longer chain. As the judge read the terms, each word sounded like a door closing. I was barred from contacting the 3 children. No calls, no messages, no appearing near their schools or any place with reasonable likelihood of contact. I had to wear a monitoring device, report regularly, live only at my registered address. Melissa sat there, her lips trembling like someone wounded, but her eyes were bright and cold. Her lawyer spoke little, only leaned in now and then to whisper, like reminding her to stay in character. I signed the papers. Not because I accepted the guilt they pinned on me, but because I knew this. If I stayed in there, I would die before I ever touched the truth. I walked out with a heavy band around my ankle, but I walked out. The air outside was cold and real, carrying the smell of wet earth. I took a deep breath, as if my lungs had forgotten how. People were still waiting on the courthouse steps. Cameras turned toward me. Questions flew like hungry birds. I didn't answer. I lowered my head and went straight to my lawyer's car. She dropped me off at my house just as dusk settled. The home I'd lived in for over a decade stood there like an old man itself, trembling under scrutiny. The porch light was on, but the yellow glow didn't warm me. I stepped up, unlocked the door, and the moment I entered, my heart sank. A strange smell. The metallic scent of drawers opened too many times, the smell of disturbed dust. In the living room, sofa cushions were flipped. The cabinet by the fireplace stood open. On the table, stacks of papers I'd kept neat were scattered like fallen leaves. They'd been here. I moved slowly from room to room, afraid that one hard step might break something else invisible. The family photo frames were gone. The picture of the 3 kids by the Christmas tree, the oldest with his arm around the younger 2, was gone. On the dining room wall, where I once hung a photo of their mother when she was young, there was only a lighter outline of dust around the nail. I touched it, my finger picking up a thin layer of dust, like touching an erased memory. In the bedroom, the bottom drawer had been pulled all the way out. I bent down, my heart pounding as I thought of the brown envelope. I lifted old coats, dug under folded sheets. It was still there, right where I'd hidden it, silent as a stone keeping an oath. I held it for a moment, didn't open it, just felt its weight like an anchor keeping me upright. I closed the bedroom door and drew the curtains. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't want to hear them talk about me in the voice used for crime stories. I made a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the wall clock inch forward. Each tick made me think of the children, where they were sleeping, whether they'd eaten, whether they were crying, and most of all, whether they still believed I was their grandfather, or if they were already filled with stories about a kidnapper. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. I flinched like someone touched a wound. Unknown number. I stared for a few seconds before answering, keeping my voice low. Hello. There was silence, just quick breathing, then a whisper, very small, trembling but painfully familiar. Grandpa, it's me. I jumped to my feet, the chair scraping the floor. My heart clenched. I looked around the dark kitchen as if someone might be listening through the walls. Where are you? I asked, trying to stay calm, my throat so dry the words cracked. I'm not supposed to call, the voice rushed. Mom took my phone. But I found one in the bathroom. There's a landline here. Here, the word sounded foreign, not like home. Where is here? I pressed, careful not to say too much. A hotel, the whisper said. A big hotel, thick carpets, people in uniforms. I saw the word lake, something on a sign outside the window. I'm not sure. I closed my eyes. A luxury hotel, thick carpets, uniforms. That wasn't where a struggling mother would take 3 children. I heard a door open on the other end, footsteps, someone calling the child's name. The voice dropped even lower, more urgent. Mom says you're bad. She says you locked us up. A pause, swallowing. But you didn't lock us up. You just took care of us. I wanted to say, I'm here. I wanted to say, I'll bring you home. But I knew every extra word was a risk. I had to ask the right questions. Is anyone else there? Is your mom with someone? I asked. There's a man, the child said, then swallowed. Not the lawyer. He talks to Mom in the hallway. His voice, it sounds like someone giving orders. A chill ran down my spine. Someone giving orders. Not a companion, but someone in control. What else do you see? I asked, keeping my questions steady, like taking a statement. There's security downstairs, the whisper said. Mom won't let us go down. The door has an extra lock. I heard Mom say, don't let the old man contact them. She told someone, just keep them here until the next hearing. I clenched my teeth until my jaw ached. The restraining order turned me into an outsider. And the kids were locked inside a luxury room, double-bolted with guards and a man giving orders. Footsteps came closer. Another voice grew clearer. My grandchild was breathing hard. Grandpa, I have to hang up. If Mom finds out... The voice hesitated, then rushed like throwing out a lifeline. Remember, in the hallway there's a painting. Sailboats. Under it, there's a nameplate. Something sweet. I couldn't read it all, and Mom's room key card, it has a swan on it. Then the line went dead. I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear, listening only to the long tone. In the dark kitchen, I could hear the clock ticking, like it was counting down. I sat down. My hands trembled slightly, but my mind felt strangely clear. Lake, thick carpet, uniforms, extra locks, a swan on the key card. Each detail was like a shard of glass. Put together the right way, they would reflect a name, a place, a path. I pulled out a notebook. I didn't write full sentences, just quick keywords, afraid I'd lose them if I blinked. I understood something more frightening than the headlines. Time was not on my side. If they were keeping the kids until the next hearing, it meant they were waiting for a decisive move, a final lock. And I, with an ankle monitor and a court order, was forced to stand still like a shadow. But I still had one thing they couldn't take. I looked toward the bedroom where the brown envelope lay hidden. Then I looked down at the cold band around my ankle. I told myself silently, like speaking to my own heart, if I couldn't reach the kids with my feet, I would reach them through traces, and I would not let them have a next hearing the way they planned. I had just set my pen down when the doorbell rang, 3 short, firm chimes, the kind from someone who didn't fear being turned away. Outside, the night was still wet with rain, streetlights smearing cold silver across the concrete. I cracked the door open, just enough to see. A man stood there in a dark overcoat, hair neatly combed, holding a leather briefcase as if headed to a meeting rather than the house of an old man fresh out of detention. He smiled, polite and hollow. "Mr. Warren?" he asked, his voice low and clear. "I'm Grant Hollis, Melissa's attorney." I didn't invite him in. I kept the door right where it was, like a boundary. "I have nothing to say to her." "Not a conversation," he replied immediately, calm as if reading a rehearsed line. "Just a proposal to end this quietly. For everyone." The phrase, "for everyone," almost made me laugh, but nothing came out. I looked at the briefcase. Men like him don't come for compassion. They come to close a deal. "You can be quick," I said. Grant pulled a thick white envelope and a folded document from the case. He held them up at eye level, not touching me, keeping distance like he feared contamination. "This is an agreement to waive all custody claims," he said. "You sign. You agree not to contact the children, not to speak to the media, not to accuse Melissa. In return, you receive enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life." I glanced at the white envelope. It was thick enough that I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. "I'm not selling the children." Grant shrugged, his tone still courteous. "You're not selling. You're simply stepping aside. Truth doesn't live in feelings anymore. It lives in what the court believes, and the court is leaning against you." He slid the paper closer. A bold number stood out, with a signature already printed below, leaving only my line blank. I looked at the number. It was large enough to soften many people. Large enough to make one thing clear to me. They were buying my silence, not my time. "Where did Melissa get the money to hire you?" I asked, still looking at the number. Grant smiled faintly. "You're practical. I like that. The money comes from people who want things kept simple. As for you, you should think about your health." I felt the ankle monitor grow hot against my skin. I pictured the kids locked in that hotel room, the extra bolt, the man giving orders. This envelope wasn't reconciliation, it was a velvet noose. "I'm not signing," I said. Grant didn't look surprised. He took out a check, laid its edge across his palm, and offered it like a hand towel. "Then consider this assistance. No strings attached. You take it, things get easier. You refuse, I'm afraid you won't withstand the pressure." I looked at the check. Blue ink. A long number. The payer's name wasn't Melissa, not Grant, a name I'd never seen before. I read it carefully, then looked up. "You brought someone else's check to my house to tell me to disappear," I said slowly. "Do you think I can't read?" Grant tilted his head. "I think you're tired, old, And you understand the law. Prison can be unforgiving, Mr. Warren. Things can go wrong for people who don't have protection." The words dropped like a stone into a well, quiet but deep. For a few seconds, all I heard was rain on the porch roof. Then I reached out. Grant thought I was taking it. His fingers loosened slightly, like he'd already won. I took the check, looked at it one last time, as if carving the payer's name into my memory. Then, right in front of him, I tore it in half, then into quarters. The pieces fell onto the step, soaked by rain, drifting like dead leaves. Grant froze. The smile vanished. His face went cold. "You just made a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "You just confirmed what I needed." He frowned. "What's that?" "That this is all about money," I said. "If it were a misunderstanding, she wouldn't have sent someone like you. If it were motherly love, there wouldn't be a stranger's check." Grant watched me for a second, then stepped back. "You should think about yourself. I won't repeat this." He turned and walked down the steps, his posture still polished, as if the words he'd spoken never existed. When the black car disappeared at the end of the street, I finally let out a long, heavy breath. I bent down and picked up one piece of the check that still held the name. My fingers were wet, the paper soft, but the letters were readable. I took it inside, spread it on the kitchen table beside my notebook. One task filled my mind. Find the person behind that name. I couldn't call the kids. I couldn't go to the hotel. But I could call someone who still knew how to follow money, the way others follow footprints in snow. I picked up the phone and searched for a number I hadn't dialed in a long time. My finger paused, then pressed call. 2 rings, then a rough voice answered, edged with caution. "Hello?" "Caleb," I said. "It's Warren." A brief silence, then the voice softened. "Good Lord, you still alive? I saw you on TV." "I need you," I said plainly. "Not to vent, to investigate." Caleb exhaled, like pushing himself up from an old chair. "Talk." I told him quickly, cleanly, only what mattered. The kids taken, the money offer, the stranger's check, Melissa's lawyer, the court conditions. No big words, just facts, handed over like tracks to a hunter. Caleb stayed silent while I spoke. When I finished, he asked immediately, "No detours." "You still have part of the check?" "I'm looking at it." "Read me the name." I did. Caleb didn't react right away, but I heard pen scratching on paper. "Did you ever hear that name 12 years ago?" he asked. I looked up at the kitchen cabinet where family photos once hung, now just dust outlines. "No." "Then someone's funding this," Caleb said. "People don't fund out of kindness. They fund for leverage." I swallowed. "Can you do it?" "Yes," he said. "But understand, this kind of player never works alone. I'll trace the money. I'll see where Melissa got it, who she paid, and who's behind that expensive lawyer." "I need it fast," I said. "You're right," Caleb replied. "Time isn't on your side." He paused, then his voice dropped. "Warren, you raised those kids 12 years. Did you ever file anything about them? Medical records, school files, insurance, benefits?" "Yes," I said. "All of it." "Hold on to it," Caleb said. "And don't sign anything. I'll meet you in the morning. Bring every document you have." I hung up. The kitchen fell quiet again. I looked at the scrap of check, the unfamiliar name, then toward the bedroom where the brown envelope waited. Then I remembered a small detail I'd once dismissed. Years ago, when I enrolled the youngest in preschool, the office clerk had stared at the birth certificate longer than usual, then said something odd. "Your grandchild looks like you right here." Back then, I laughed, thinking she was joking. Now my chest tightened, like touching a hidden seam. To some people, children are burdens. To me, they are blood. But to those paying to claim them, they weren't worthless. They were the key to something much bigger than I'd ever imagined. Caleb arrived early the next morning, dew still clinging to the steps, the street barely awake. He wore an old baseball cap and a dark jacket, looking like an ordinary passerby. But his eyes weren't ordinary. They carried the focus of someone who'd followed trails all night. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured coffee. Caleb didn't drink right away. He placed a thin file on the table, smoothing its edge like someone about to say something that shouldn't be said loudly. "The children's biological father," he said. "His file isn't public. It was sealed." Oh, I wasn't as shocked as I expected. Just felt a heavy drop in my chest, like fitting the last piece of a picture I never wanted to see. "Who was he?" I asked. Caleb read the name, a name that had appeared in local business pages years ago, then vanished. A quiet investor, money everywhere, recently deceased, stroke, sudden, a rushed will. "The estate?" I asked. Caleb lifted his eyes. Tens of millions of dollars. The number rang in my head like metal hitting metal. I thought of the money offer, the torn check, the luxury hotel, the man giving orders, everything lined up with chilling precision. "The children," Caleb continued, "are the legal heirs." I set my coffee down, hearing the soft tap against the table. I remembered the old birth certificate, the clerk's long look, the offhand comment. I'd ignored it because my life revolved around meals, homework, and peaceful sleep. I never thought about money. They did. "Money doesn't move on its own," I said. "It needs conditions." Caleb nodded. "Release of funds is tied to the legal guardian, the signer, the controller." I understood immediately. Melissa needed me out, not just sidelined, but convicted. A ruling strong enough to cut me off from the kids, end any challenge, silence me. Then exclusive guardianship would unlock the money. The kids, to them, were living keys. "Why now?" I asked. "Deadlines," Caleb said. "There's a trigger clause. If the paperwork isn't completed in a certain window, the money freezes or shifts elsewhere." I closed my eyes. Time again. This time running on someone else's clock. "Melissa's lawyer?" I asked. "Paid with an advance from a trust linked to the estate," Caleb said. "Not in Melissa's name, not in the kids. A middle layer." I gave a dry laugh. "That's why he was so confident with the check." Caleb watched me closely. "You see it now. They don't need you gone forever. They just need you to lose at the right moment." I opened the drawer, took out the brown envelope, and set it on the table. I didn't open it. I just placed it there, like putting an unexpected piece on a chessboard. "I can't wait to be attacked," I said. "I have to move first." Caleb leaned back. "Moving first is dangerous." "I'm already cornered," I said. "Danger is all that's left." We went through everything: school records, medical files, police reports from the rainy night, returned letters, benefit acknowledgments. Caleb marked points of counterattack, but I knew paperwork alone wasn't enough. They were winning with narrative and speed. I needed a move that slowed them down. "What do you need?" Caleb asked. "I need light," I said. "Not the spotlight they control. The right light." Caleb went quiet for a few seconds. "What are you planning to do?" I looked down at the monitoring bracelet on my ankle. "I can't go far, but I can set a trap right where they think I'm powerless." I laid out my plan, slow and clear. No extra details, no emotion mixed in. Caleb listened, nodding at intervals, then let out a long breath. "This move," he said, "could force them into the open. But if the timing is off—" "I know," I cut in. "If the timing is off, I lose everything. But if it's right, they won't have time to react." Caleb stood up and put on his hat. "I'll handle the money trail. You handle the legal side and the bait." I walked him to the door. It was fully morning now. Thin sunlight filtered through the trees, making the house feel less cold. But inside me, a decision had hardened like steel. When the door closed, I went back to the kitchen table and opened the brown envelope for the first time in days. The papers inside were neatly stacked, waiting in silence. My hands didn't shake. I felt frighteningly clear. They wanted me to defend myself. I was going to attack. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with the one thing people who play for money truly fear. Truth, delivered at the right time, in the right place, with the right signature. I didn't need the news to know Melissa would make her next move. I only had to look at the calendar on the wall and remember what Caleb said about deadlines. When people are racing the clock, they choose the fastest option. And the fastest option is to turn 3 children into luggage and disappear. That afternoon, a short segment aired on the local channel. A reporter stood in front of the courthouse talking about a mother finally regaining her children, then cut to footage of Melissa in an elegant outfit, holding one child in front of the cameras. She didn't cry. She chose a carefully practiced tremor in her voice. "I just want to take my children somewhere safer, overseas," she said, smiling in a way I'd seen before, years ago, when she lied to borrow money from me. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to every word like a blade being sharpened on stone. I looked at the monitor on my ankle. It felt like a chain, reminding me the law was standing on the wrong side. I could sit here and wait for the court date, wait to be reduced to a brief item after the weather, or I could do something a man in his 70s shouldn't do. I called Caleb. He answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting. "They've booked a flight," I said. "Tonight or early tomorrow morning." Caleb exhaled. "I heard mention of a private airstrip on the edge of the city, a charter flight, not through the main terminal." I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then stood up. The restraining order still hung over me like a dark cloud. But in my mind, there was only one image. 3 children sitting quietly in light-colored leather seats, looking out an airplane window, not understanding why their grandfather wasn't there. I put on my old jacket, pulled a hat low, and drove out of the neighborhood like someone going to buy medicine. By the letter of the law, I couldn't go far. But I went anyway. I told myself that if I was arrested again, at least it would be somewhere I still had a chance to see them. The private airport sat behind a steel fence, an automatic gate, and a guard booth. Runway lights stretched into long lines of brightness in the night, like chalk marks on a blackboard. I parked far away and walked along a dirt path by the trees. The closer I got, the louder the engine sounded, like the breathing of a large animal about to leap. I saw it. A small white plane, door half open, a few men loading suitcases. On the stairs, Melissa stood angled toward a man in a suit, saying something. The wind blew her hair away from her ear for a brief moment, and I saw her real face. Not the one for the cameras, but the face of someone about to get what she wanted. The 3 children stood nearby. The oldest held the other 2 by the hand, like a child forced to grow up too fast. My heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. I stepped out of the shadows. "Melissa," I said her name. Not loud, not shouting, just enough for my voice to cut through the engine noise. She spun around, froze for a split second like someone seeing a ghost, then instantly switched to performance mode. "He's stalking us again," she screamed, loud enough for security to hear. "Where are the police? He's violating a court order." I walked straight toward the children, slow and steady, like walking across my own living room years ago. "Don't be afraid," I said. "Stand still next to me." The oldest stared at me, eyes wide. I saw their lips tremble, but they didn't run. They just tightened their grip on the younger ones. The man in the suit stepped in front of me. "You can't come closer," he said coldly. "Leave now." I looked at him, then at Melissa. "Where are you taking them?" I asked. Has anyone asked the children if they want to go? Melissa scoffed. You have no right to ask, she said, then turned to security. Call it in. He's dangerous. That was when I did the most reckless thing of my life. I rushed straight to the stairs, not to hit anyone, but to plant myself squarely in the path like an old wooden post. I grabbed the cold railing and spoke clearly. No one boards this plane until the children are allowed to speak with a lawyer assigned to protect their interests. The air froze. A second later, the man in the suit grabbed my arm. I held on tighter. I wasn't strong, but I had the weight of someone who had lived long enough to know exactly what he was losing. Melissa screamed, "He's trying to kidnap my children again." Her words cut through the night like fuel thrown on fire. Security rushed in. Then sirens sounded from a distance. Red and blue lights spread across the dark ground. Police arrived faster than I expected, as if they'd been waiting just around the corner. 2 officers restrained me. I didn't fight. I just lifted my head and looked at the children. "I'm here," I said. "Remember what I told you." The oldest tried to step forward. "Grandpa," they called, but a man blocked them. I saw Melissa bend down and whisper something into their ear. From that distance, I couldn't hear it. I only saw their shoulders draw inward. An officer read my name and asked why I was there. I answered plainly. "I came to stop them from taking the children out of the United States while the custody case is still unresolved." I said the words United States deliberately. I knew they would paint me as a trespasser if I spoke from pain instead of law. They handcuffed me again, colder than the last time because I was standing in runway wind. Melissa stepped close enough for only me to hear. "You're too late," she said. "You're old." I met her eyes. "You forgot one thing," I replied. "Old men don't run fast, but old men know how to delay." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she masked it and turned back to the officers. "Please take him away. I'm afraid for my children," she said. But the plane didn't take off. An officer told the man in the suit that the flight had to be delayed due to an active custody dispute and a report about minors being moved out of the area without a final ruling. Melissa reacted instantly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, then lowered her voice as she remembered the audience. I was pushed into the car. I knew they would add more charges. I heard fragments: violation of order, disturbance, safety risk. Each word was another stone thrown to sink me faster. But as the car door closed, I still saw the plane standing motionless, like a bird held on the ground. And in that moment, I understood I had bought the most valuable thing of all: time. I wondered if I still had a chance as everything pushed me toward the edge. Then I remembered the brown envelope on the kitchen table and Caleb's voice. Light in the right place. I closed my eyes and kept my breathing steady. If they planned to finish me with speed, I would drag them into a fight where speed no longer mattered. I wasn't taken straight back to detention after the airport incident. They said I needed a medical check because of stress and blood pressure, and transferred me to a secured hospital wing that felt like a prison in disguise. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the sound of gurney wheels on tile made the place feel clean in a way that was deeply unsettling. That night, I barely slept. Hallway lights leaked through the door crack like a thin blade of brightness. I heard footsteps pause outside my room longer than usual, then the click of a key. A nurse came in pushing a medication tray. He wore a mask that covered half his face, leaving only eyes that showed no concern. "Take this, Mr. Warren," he said flatly. "Doctor's orders. It'll help you sleep." I looked at the pills, then at the cup of water. I'd taken enough blood pressure medication in my life to know what was familiar and what wasn't. I asked the name of the drug. He didn't answer, just pushed the tray closer. A very old feeling ran up my spine, the feeling of being cornered. like when I was young in the military and someone tried to force me to sign something I hadn't read. I didn't react sharply. I slowly reached out as if to take the pills, then let the cup fall to the floor. The glass shattered loudly enough that the guard outside turned his head. "Sorry, my hand shook," I said, looking straight at the nurse. "Please bring more water. I'm thirsty." He hesitated for a brief moment, as if weighing something, then bent down to pick up the glass. Just then, the guard stepped in and asked what was going on. I pointed at the tray. "I want to know what I'm being given," I said clearly. "I have that right." The nurse's tone changed. "You're being difficult," he muttered, sliding the tray back. He left faster than before. After the door closed, I still heard his hurried footsteps down the hall. I waited a few minutes, then pressed the call button for a different nurse. I asked to see the on-call doctor and requested that the incident be documented in my file. They looked at me like I was a paranoid old man. I didn't need them to believe me yet. I only needed a trace to exist. The next morning, Caleb managed to call me through the legal visitation line. His voice was low and urgent. "Listen carefully. Someone is cleaning out evidence," he said. "I just saw a tow truck pass your place. I'm afraid they went back to your house again." "I can't get there," I said. "The monitoring order is still active." "I'll handle it," Caleb replied. "You just need to stay alive long enough for me to read what's in the envelope." I hung up, my chest heavy as stone. I imagined the house being torn apart again, photos taken, drawers left empty. But I also imagined the brown envelope still exactly where I'd hidden it for 12 years. It wasn't a keepsake. It was the lock to the entire story. That afternoon, I was told I had a visitor in the glass visiting room. I walked in and saw Caleb. In front of him sat a thick bag of files. His face was pale, like someone who'd just escaped something. "Are you okay?" I asked. Caleb gave a dry laugh. "Almost wasn't," he said. "I got into your house through the back, like the old days when I fixed your plumbing. The moment I touched the kitchen cabinet, a black car pulled up. No siren, no lights. A guy got out and walked straight into the yard like he knew I was there." My hands went cold as I listened. Caleb continued quickly. "I got the envelope, but I had to cut through the small woods behind your place. Someone chased me. I could hear footsteps right behind me. 1 second slower, and they would have had me." He set the bag on the table between us. A police officer stood behind, watching closely, as if Caleb might be a suspect too. I looked at the old brown envelope, the worn edges, a crease across it like a scar. I didn't open it right away. I just rested my hand on it, like placing it on the shoulder of an old friend. "You finally came back," I whispered. Caleb nodded. "Open it, Warren," he said. "If I'm right, it'll shatter Melissa's entire act." I pulled out the papers one by one. A copy of a birth certificate with the father's line blank, but beside it a notarized record stating that the biological father had acknowledged paternity and requested confidentiality for identity security reasons. A stamped letter from that man's law office, sent to me years ago, asking me to serve as guardian if anything happened, and an appendix detailing a trust fund for the 3 children. Then came the page that dried my throat. An agreement bearing Melissa's signature from the day she left. It stated that she voluntarily handed the 3 children over to my care and agreed not to make contact to avoid jeopardizing her financial plan with a man named Victor Langley. I looked up at Caleb. "Who is Victor?" I asked. Caleb answered like dropping a stone into water. "The agent who hired Melissa's lawyer, the one who transferred the deposit for the flight, the man who just bought her old debt to keep her under control." He paused. "And the one who profits if she gets custody." I understood then why they wanted me silent and gone. They didn't just want to win. They wanted me to have no time to say anything at all. I looked at the guard standing watch. "I want to see a public defender," I said, "and I want to file a motion to represent myself." Caleb flinched. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "If I stay quiet, they'll tell my story the way they want," I said. "I need to be the one who stands up and presents this evidence." The days that followed passed like the ticking of a clock against bone. I read every line of the documents, practiced every sentence to be short and clear. I didn't need drama, I needed truth. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Cameras sat in the corners like unblinking eyes. Melissa sat across the room in dark clothing, her hand resting on her lawyer's arm as if she were the exhausted victim. She looked at me and pressed her lips into a faint smile. The judge called the case. Hearing my name echo in that room felt like a verdict already written. The public defender stood and spoke a few flat sentences, then glanced at me as if expecting me to nod along. I looked at her, then at the judge. "Your Honor," I said, standing. The room went silent in a single beat, like someone had pulled the air from everyone's lungs. I placed both hands on the table, steady, and looked straight at the bench. "My name is Warren," I said, "and it's time the court heard the version of the man being called a kidnapper." I kept my voice calm, even though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Your Honor, I submit evidence." I opened the file bag and placed the brown envelope on the table, setting it down like a weight onto the silence of the room. Melissa leaned forward, her smile thinning. Her lawyer started to stand in protest, but the judge raised a hand. I took out the first page, the notarized handwritten document. The red stamp was clear, Melissa's signature unmistakable. I didn't read it all. I spoke only the core sentence. 12 years ago, Melissa voluntarily placed the 3 children in my care and agreed not to contact them. Not because I confined them, because she needed to disappear. A murmur rippled through the benches. Melissa half rose, then sat back down, her eyes darting. I took out the next page. And this is the part she never wanted anyone to hear. I looked straight across the room. In this agreement, Melissa accepted money to leave. In other words, she sold her rights as a mother. The words dropped into the courtroom like a stone. For a moment, no one breathed. The camera in the corner seemed frozen. I saw a woman in the back row raise a hand to her mouth. The opposing lawyer flipped through papers, his face changing color. He tried to steady himself. "Objection," he said hoarsely. "This document may be forged." "Your Honor," I replied immediately. "That is why I am submitting accompanying video evidence." I placed a USB drive sealed in an evidence bag on the table. That night, I installed a doorbell camera. I didn't install it to catch anyone. I installed it because this neighborhood has break-ins, and the camera recorded the moment Melissa abandoned her children. It also recorded the person who was with her. Melissa whipped around toward her lawyer as if slapped. "Don't let them watch it," she blurted, her voice higher than usual, then immediately bit her lip. The judge looked at her, then at me. "Mr. Warren, can you authenticate the source of this data?" "I can," I said. "Timestamps, dates, device ID. I also had a technical firm extract it. The documentation is included." Opposing counsel stammered, trying to seize back control. "Even if such a video exists, it does not prove the receipt of money, and he could have staged it." Melissa blinked rapidly, her hands clenched in her lap. I could see she was panicking, though still trying to hold herself together. She turned to the judge, her voice breaking as if rehearsed. "He hates me. He'll do anything to destroy me. He forged documents." I nodded slowly, as if I'd been waiting for that exact line. "Your Honor, I understand they would say that, and I have not yet played my final card." The air in the courtroom tightened. The judge leaned forward. Melissa looked at me, and for the first time there was real fear in her eyes. At that moment, a loud noise came from the door. Hinges screeched, and the courtroom doors burst open. Everyone turned as footsteps hurried across the tile, and I saw a small figure standing frozen in the doorway, trying to catch his breath. It was Noah, my oldest grandchild. He looked thinner, his shirt looser than before, his eyes red, but his gaze was strangely firm. A court officer stepped forward to block him, while Melissa jumped to her feet, her face draining pale as if she'd just seen her worst fear. "No," she snapped. "He's not allowed in." Noah swallowed hard, his voice shaking but clear. "I asked to speak. I have evidence." The courtroom fell silent as if muted. I saw the judge look at Noah, then at the lawyers, then give a slight nod. "What is your name?" "Noah Carter," the boy replied. "I am Melissa's son." I heard that last name like a pinprick to memory. Carter. I had heard it somewhere among the fragments Caleb had just pieced together. Noah stepped forward, clutching an old phone and a small USB like a lifeline. "My mom, she wouldn't let me call Grandpa, but I hid this." He looked straight toward the judge's bench. "I have an audio recording." Melissa shook her head repeatedly, lips pressed tight. "He's lying. He was coached." Noah didn't look at his mother. He spoke to the court, slowly, word by word. "I recorded it because I was scared. I was scared that one day everyone would believe my mom and no one would believe Grandpa." My throat tightened. I had thought I was alone against the world. It turned out I wasn't. The judge motioned to the clerk. "Play it." The sound came through the small courtroom speakers, slightly distorted by the old device, but the voice was unmistakable. "Listen, Noah. You just need to stay quiet. You kids are the ticket. Do you understand?" Melissa's voice, cold and sharp, with none of the sobbing she showed on television. "That fund, that money, it's yours on paper, but the person who signs is me. And if that old man wins, I lose everything. I didn't stay away for 12 years just to share with a washed-up nobody." Someone in the courtroom gasped, then quickly fell silent. An older man in the back row shook his head in disbelief. The recording continued, cutting through layers of pretense like a knife. "Don't pretend to cry. Cry if you want, but only in front of the cameras. You think I love you kids? I love money." Melissa laughed with contempt. "Behave and you'll live comfortably later. Don't behave and I have ways." Noah stood still like a statue, though his hands trembled. I wanted to stand, to run to him, to hold him, but I only gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into my skin. When the audio stopped, the silence that followed was even heavier. The judge looked directly at Melissa, his gaze hard. "Ms. Melissa, do you deny that this is your voice?" Melissa opened her mouth, then froze. She looked around for an escape, then suddenly turned on Noah, her voice shrill. "You betrayed your own mother?" Noah stepped back half a step. "You betrayed us." That was the moment Melissa lost every layer of performance. She lunged toward Noah, her hand raised as if to snatch the phone and USB. Everything happened so fast that I only managed to stand up on instinct. "Melissa!" I shouted, but the police were already close. They stopped her before she could reach Noah. Chairs scraped, people cried out, then order was restored within tense seconds. Melissa struggled, hair disheveled, eyes wild. She shouted fragmented accusations and blame, but the noise only exposed her further. The judge slammed the gavel. "Silence. Any further disruption, and I will order immediate detention in this courtroom." Melissa's private attorney slumped back, his face white. He whispered something to an assistant, then hurriedly closed his briefcase like someone abandoning a sinking ship. The prosecutor stood, voice firm. Your Honor, in light of new evidence, we request immediate consideration of obstruction of justice, witness manipulation, and custody-related fraud aimed at seizing inherited assets. We also request an investigation into the funding of the legal team and media campaign. I looked at Melissa, and for the first time, I saw no confidence in her eyes, only bitter confusion. The judge turned to me. Mr. Warren, given these developments, the court will reconsider the restrictive conditions. Effective immediately, I order the restraints removed. The click of metal unlocking was quiet, but to me it sounded like a door opening after weeks of being barred. My wrists ached from the cuffs, but the sudden lightness made my eyes sting. I didn't cheer. I just let out a long breath, like someone breaking the surface after being held underwater. Noah looked at me. In his eyes were fear, exhaustion, but also something I hadn't dared hope for. He believed me, and he had chosen to stand with the truth. Justice was not finished. But in that moment, I knew the balance had begun to shift. After that hearing, things didn't end with a single gavel strike. They ended with stacks of paperwork, interrogations, late-night meetings, and courthouse hallway lights that reminded me more of a hospital than a place where justice lives. But the truth had found its path. 1 week later, the prosecutor moved to dismiss all charges against me. The reasons were read clearly in court, in a dry voice: insufficient grounds, fabricated evidence, contradictory testimony, and indications of organized staging. I heard each line as if stones were being lifted from my chest. The judge looked at me for a long time, then spoke slowly, as if wanting everyone to remember. Mr. Warren, the court affirms that you did not kidnap the children. You have been their de facto guardian for 12 years. You protected them when others walked away. I didn't cry. I only bowed my head, my hand resting on the wooden table, feeling its scratches like traces of countless hearings before. Some people behind me clapped softly. Others turned away in shame for having believed the easier story. Melissa no longer stood with neat hair and a pale dress like on the first day. She was in handcuffs, eyes red and sunken, still clinging to defiance until the end. Her lawyer asked for leniency, spoke of pressure, maternal instinct, a momentary lapse. The judge let him finish, then replied with a single sentence that silenced the room. This was not a momentary lapse. This was a plan. The sentence was delivered not long after, long enough that her children would grow up without seeing her as a looming shadow. As police led Melissa away, she looked back for Noah. He stood close to me, his shoulders small but straight, his eyes turned away. No hatred, just a final decision. I heard the cuffs close, then the door shut. One dark chapter ended. What remained was life. And life, sometimes, is harder than court. Child services came to my house, checked everything, asked every question. They wanted to be sure I was capable. I didn't blame them. I showed them the children's rooms, dental appointments, vaccination schedules, drawings on the fridge, old photos that had been scattered and that I pasted into a new album. One afternoon, they called me into their office and informed me that legal guardianship was officially restored to me. I signed my name, the handwriting old but steady. When I stepped into the parking lot, the sunlight felt gentle, as if the sky itself had exhaled. Caleb helped me handle the trust. The biological father had left a large estate, but the safest way wasn't to grab and display it. It was to lock it properly. A trust bank built a new structure with independent oversight, staggered disbursements by age, prioritizing education, healthcare, and housing. Money stopped being bait. It became a life jacket in the truest sense. Word spread in town. Some people started speaking sweetly. A realtor knocked, praised my house as classic Americana, suggested upgrades, staff, indulgence. I listened and gave a thin smile. Enjoyment isn't about showing others you're enjoying yourself. That evening, Noah asked cautiously, "Grandpa, are we rich now?" I sat beside him, watching the two younger ones assembling puzzles on the floor. "We have enough to live decently," I said, "but being rich isn't what helps you sleep." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded, like someone setting down a heavy stone. I decided to sell the old house. Not because I hated it, but because it held too many memories in every creaking floorboard, every scratch on the doorframe, every corner where Melissa once set the children down and vanished. I wanted them to remember childhood by camping trips, laughter, and road smells, not police sirens and cameras at the gate. On the day I signed the sale papers, I stood in the empty living room, my hand on the window frame. I remembered the armchair where I'd stayed up all night waiting for fevers to break. Remembered simple dinners of hot stew and bread. Remembered nights sitting alone, wondering where I'd gone wrong for my daughter to become who she did. I stopped blaming myself. I closed the door gently, like closing a room behind me. Instead of buying a bigger house, I bought a modest RV, enough space for 3 children to sleep comfortably, enough for me to drive slowly along America's long roads. No luxury, no flash. Just a moving home where I could make coffee in the morning and watch the kids run across a campground lawn. Caleb laughed when he saw me sign the contract. "You're strange." "I'm just old," I replied. "Old enough to know what I need." In the first weeks, the children still jumped at the doorbell, still scanned rooms when strangers appeared. Noah slept lightly, sometimes dreaming his mother was pulling him away. I took him to see a child psychologist, and I sat in too, not to speak for him, but to learn when silence was the right thing. Little by little, color returned. The middle one laughed loudly at my nonsense stories in the kitchen. The youngest stopped hiding toys under the pillow. Noah stopped looking at his phone like a weapon and started seeing it as just a phone. One morning before departure, Noah stepped onto the porch with me, looking over the freshly mowed yard for the last time. "Grandpa," he said softly, "I'm sorry I doubted you. Sometimes I was afraid you'd hate me." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Fear is normal, but you stood up in the hardest place." I looked down the road, sunlight stretching long across it. "And you chose what was right." That afternoon, I closed the RV door, hearing the latch click softly. The 3 children took their seats, each holding something familiar. I sat behind the wheel, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The engine started smoothly, steadily, like a new heartbeat. In the rearview mirror, the old house shrank, then became a small dot. I didn't feel loss. I felt light. "Where are we going, Grandpa?" the youngest asked. I smiled, eyes on the road. "Toward peace." Then I said it like a promise to all 3 of them, and to myself. We're not done with the journey. The RV rolled along long roads like a thread stitching my life back together. One morning we stopped at a campground near the Smoky Mountains, dew still clinging to the windows. I opened the door and breathed in wet pine. Noah built a fire with steadier hands. The younger 2 argued over who got syrup first, then burst out laughing when I dropped a pancake back into the pan. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was warm enough that my heart stopped tightening whenever I remembered the courtroom. We learned to live with less and feel lighter. Each child had a small box for important things. Noah kept a photo of the 4 of us at a park, one he'd secretly printed and tucked into a book. The second kept a worn teddy bear. The youngest kept a toy car. I kept a hardbound notebook and a pen, which Caleb once joked was my weapon. I didn't laugh because he was right. At night, when the kids slept, I sat on the RV step, listening to crickets and looking at a dark sky filled with stars I rarely saw in town because of streetlights. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have been if Melissa hadn't returned. I'd raised 3 children on a pension and simple meals, grown used to quiet endurance to being seen as an eccentric old man. I thought sacrifice was something you did silently. But I'd paid for that silence, nearly lost the children, nearly lost my life. What I learned wasn't to distrust everyone, but to protect what I love. Family, to me, is no longer a word on a birth certificate. Family is who stays when others turn away, who holds a child's hand in the rain and says, "Come inside, Grandpa's here," who stands up when cornered, not for revenge, but to keep the truth. I also learned something gentler. I didn't need to carry hatred forward. Hatred is like heavy luggage. It tires you and tires the children too. I don't forgive what Melissa did, but I choose not to let her decide the rest of my life. I choose peace, mornings with coffee and hot bread, and the sound of Grandpa echoing in a small space. One rainy afternoon in Tennessee, the RV parked by a still lake, Noah sat beside me under the awning, watching rain fall in threads. He asked softly, as if afraid to hurt me, "Grandpa, do you hate my mom?" I looked at him longer than necessary, then shook my head. I don't want my heart tied to someone who already walked away. Hate is a tie, too. I rested my hand on his shoulder. I just want you to grow up without carrying that weight. Noah exhaled like he'd been allowed to set something down too heavy for his age. Then he leaned his head against my shoulder for a brief moment, long enough for me to know the cracks in him were slowly mending. I share this not to turn anyone into a villain in people's imagination, nor to encourage extreme actions. The story in this video is a fictional narrative inspired by real-life situations and human experiences, intended to convey moral value, life lessons, and emotional impact. It does not encourage imitation of the actions shown, does not incite harm, and does not target any individual or organization. I believe the most valuable things we can keep after a crisis are clarity, firm boundaries, the courage to speak truth at the right moment, and love strong enough to heal instead of destroy. If you are in real life and facing a similar situation, please remember a few simple things that can save you. Document everything with dates and times. Keep messages, paperwork, receipts, any trace that matters. Seek legal help as early as possible, even if you think you don't stand a chance. And don't carry it alone out of fear of judgment. Silence is sometimes not noble. Sometimes it just lets others write your story for you. If you've stayed with me to the very end, thank you sincerely for listening and for staying with the story of an old man and 3 children. If the story touched you even a little, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos, where we'll meet more lives, more choices, and moments that remind us to be kinder to one another. You can also share this video with a friend, a family member, or anyone who needs a bit of hope and a reminder that they are not alone. I know your time is valuable, so your presence here is a gift.